This is the 25th episode for the Climb and Flow podcast, and today's guest is Mark Smith. Mark might not be very well known in the climbing world, but he's got some incredible hard aid climbing ascents under his belt. So there's a bit of a background story with Mark and one of his ascents in Yosemite, but in this conversation, we don't talk about that. There is a link below and in the description, which will take you to a YouTube video called Assault on El Capitan. If you want to find out more about that story, please follow the link and indulge yourself in this quite sad and amazing story at the same time. And I'll let you listen to a story. So, this is the 25th episode for the Climate Flow podcast. And today's guest is none other than Mark Smith. For anyone listening at home, Mark is not in the limelight, but he's moved into the dark art of aid climbing and has done some pretty cool ascents, I'd say. Does that sound about right, Mark?
Well, I think that that sounds good to me. The dark art, I hadn't thought of it like that.
Yeah. So I guess it's a very niche style of climbing, isn't it?
Well, I think climbing has definitely shifted over the years that I've been climbing because my first notable experiences go back to the late 1970s, actually, maybe 78, 79. And sport climbing, as it's known here in the United States, just didn't exist in any form at all. And so the notion of climbing big walls and doing a climbing was more in the forefront of climbers' thoughts because climbing just hadn't gone mainstream to the average person then.
Yeah.
So I can see where at this point talking about a climbing is talking about something that's just completely foreign to most climbers, and that wasn't so much the case back in the 80s when most of my climbing happened.
Yeah, okay, that's true. I think so. So, just for listeners at home, aid climbing, for those that don't understand, aid climbing is where you use your climbing equipment to gain height as opposed to hands and feet moving up the rock.
Yes, that's a good summary of it. And people might wonder, well, why in the world would you have any interest in doing that? Um, and generally, the reason it's done is to climb larger cliffs, such as big walls that don't have an easy or even sometimes possible path up by just using your hands and feet.
Yeah.
And since back in the day, the notion of what's possible to climb without using a climbing, that's completely changed. The thought of climbing El Capitan in Yosemite National Park, which is using your hands and your feet, was just an unknown thought back then. You could do segments of it like that, but not the entire cliff.
Yeah, yeah. I guess two ascents that come to mind, I guess notable ascents are, I guess when Lynn Hill first free climbed the nose. I guess that was way ahead of its time for big wall climbing in the valley. And I guess the Dawn Wall, Kevin Jurgensen and Tommy Caldwell free climbed, which was originally an aid route.
Well, yes. And in the case of that ladder climb you mentioned, the actual path they took differs significantly from Warren Harding's first ascent back in the I guess that was probably early 70s, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
Um, as they actually rappelled from the summit and did weeks of exploration work to just figure out where they could craft a path that was actually climbable as a free climb. And it goes up approximately where the original Dawn Wall went, or as Warren Harding called it, the Wall of the Early Morning Light.
yeah,
Um, but it does deviate from it significantly because the exact path that Warren Harding took itself isn't or wouldn't be free climbable.
Okay, yeah, okay. So yeah, Tommy spent a lot of time trying to work a pathway up there. Yeah. So when you got into climbing, did you start climbing or did you immediately go into aid climbing?
Well, when I first started climbing, it was free climbing, and I was probably 15 years old or so. So the notion of wall climbing or A climbing hadn't really occurred to me. But I seemed to gravitate toward it because there were some local rocks around where I lived, and I found myself making a pair of aiders, which are those nylon ladders, and working on climbing them as A climbs. So it just seemed to be somehow inbred in me the notion of wanting to do that.
Yeah, okay. So what was your first experience like and I guess what was it that attracted you to it?
Well, that's a strange, or it's a good question, and um, I don't know that it has a normal answer. The answer probably seem a little strange. And to some degree, maybe I don't even understand myself exactly what that was. I think that I had this desire of a need to be able to see a path, a crack system going somewhere and just feeling the need and desire, like, well, I just want to go there. And, back then when my free climbing ability was 5.8 at the maximum,
Yeah.
probably, in the Yosemite decimal system, which is seems very trivial today. Um, as a 16-year-old, it would be like, oh, well, let's just I'll use A climbing to go get there. And I also became interested in tree climbing. My family would um, often go out for the day to a place that had these large ponderosa pines and Douglas fir. Ponderosa pine isn't actually too good for tree climbing, but the Douglas firs are, because I got some knife blades, which are thin pitons, and you could hammer those in really without damaging the tree because of how thick their bark was, and then get up to a limb and then put a sling around it for protection and keep going. So just the notion of climbing and going places I couldn't go otherwise was really intriguing, and A climbing just became the tool by which I could do that.
Okay, cool. Wow, okay. That's quite brave, climbing a tree with pitons. Not sure that I would have done that.
Well, that's what my mother thought, but she put up with it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I guess I guess when you're a youngster, you do a lot of things and don't really think about the consequences. You think about the right now.
True.
Yeah. So so after you've had a play on the tree and some local crags, um, I guess what did you have your eyes set on? What was there anything that you want to do after that?
So I started off after high school. I went to college. My first year was not a good experience. My mother had cancer, and she ended up passing away right at the start of my second year in college. And at that point, I emotionally just wasn't able to be a student.
Okay.
And so I dropped out from college, and I had a friend that also didn't was of adult age but didn't have a job, and we thought, well, why don't we just start climbing? So there was a local cliff that called the Riverside Quarry. It's in Southern California. It's 200 feet tall. It's dead vertical, overhanging in spots. It had actually been a quarry. It had been dynamited out quite a long time before. And we started climbing there. And that cliff is, it's interesting now. It has been converted largely into a free climbing area, which back then I wouldn't have thought was possible. But It's most of the climbs there are 512 and harder, just due to the steepness of the cliff and the lack of holds. And so we started 8 climbing there and climbs a number of notable, very difficult climbs, for the challenge of doing it. But that soon transitioned into the notion of climbing El Capitan.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really so much my idea, but my partners to think, oh, he had his eye on climbing an unclimbed route in El Capitan, and I became complicit in doing it.
And your partner was Richard.
Yes, that's Richard Jensen.
Yeah, okay, Richard. Yeah. Going back to climb the quarried rock, like my understanding of quarried rock, it's quite loose in places, so it's not always the ideal place to climb.
Yes, the Riverside Quarry had not been climbed much, just due to the fact that there's a lot of loose rock there.
Yeah,
It needs about another 500 years probably for it to, get rid of, shed the choss off of it and become more stable.
yeah,
And Richard had climbed at the Riverside Quarry before he ever met me, just probably a large part due to the proximity to where he lived, and also for having a similar internal need that I did to go places that weren't obvious or easy to go.
okay,
And so the Riverside Quarry, became his venue for doing that. And then when he pulled me into it, we started climbing there. We were climbing there, daily,
yeah,
for a span of time. But almost all of that is really steep A climbing, and it's notably loose. And one of the scary moments, or maybe scary afterthoughts, is that there's a climb that we, um, uh, completed. It's I think, three pitches that kind of wanders its way, up through the quarry. And we came back a number of years later, and the a giant block that was the centerpiece of the climb was just gone. And looking up, it was like, well, what? Like I couldn't, like, where did the climb go? It was like confusing to me.
yeah.
And we realized that this block that's probably 20 feet by 10 feet by 6 feet thick, as an
Wow.
estimate of how big it was, that whole thing had fallen out of there, and it was laying upside down at the base of the climb. And you could actually see our piton scars along one edge of it
Okay.
as it's, yeah. And you could go there today and I go show you the piton scars on this block in the ground that we'd actually been, hammering pitons to get past this thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know that I really recommend the quarry a lot, but it was very, is important to my development as a climber and to my character.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's I'm guessing that's youthful ignorance at the time, not ignorance as in you don't care, but ignorance in the sense of that I guess one doesn't quite have the understanding as yet of the risks.
Well,
As I look
well,
in my career where I've been in situations and look back and think, yeah, actually, maybe I'm not saying you shouldn't have been there. I'm saying that you might not have understood the risks.
there could be a factor to that. I think that at the time that we were climbing at the quarry, that generally the we understood the fact that it was a dangerous place and that you had to be careful.
Yeah. Okay.
And we did everything that we could to be as careful as we could. The
Yeah.
climb I mentioned in particular, um, is one that if we had realized the instability of where that block was, the problem is that the cliff had fractured, at an angle, um, a planar angle sloping, downward to where the block could slide out of place rather than just fall off the
Yeah.
cliff. So the
Okay.
block was actually inset flush into the cliff and then just slid out of place, leaving a slab where it used to be and an overhang at the top of where it was.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, if we had realized that that block was that unstable, obviously we would have never gone there. But
Yeah.
I think that the having come out of the experience of um, going to college, starting out well, what all transpired with my mother, really being in a place that I had to drop out from doing it, I was in search of myself and who I was.
Yeah.
And the quarry became a place of personal testing and development. And so I think that it's more a case that we understood the risk. I think I understand it better now, and so your point's well taken.
Yeah.
But it's not that we were completely ignorant either.
No.
And
Yeah.
I wouldn't climb the things we climbed at the quarry now because I don't have the benefit to the risk to reward ratio isn't as good anymore because what I have to gain for the reward at this point would be pretty minimal.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So do you feel that the experiences at the quarry set you up quite well for I guess some of the more technical ascents that you've done in aid climbing?
Well, that's certainly the case. The biggest thing that we gained from the quarry was the mindset that we can, within me, is the ability to do hard things, to figure out problems, to find solutions, to overcome, and that if something is dangerous and scary, that doesn't mean that it's inaccessible. It just more means that I have to have caution in how I approach it,
Yeah,
but it doesn't limit me from going there.
yeah,
And so I think that those attributes of character development were the primary thing. Obviously, there was some skill development and use of equipment in that was essential,
yeah,
but um, that's more easily learned than character development.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. And yeah, I think my little experience of aid climbing, um, I think it feels um, so much more intense, especially if you're somebody who's used to climbing using their hands and feet to then move into aid climbing. It feels a lot more intense because every placement you make has to at least be able to hold your body weight. So, whereas a lot of people nowadays who go trad climbing, they might never test their gear because they might not fall on it, but they might build an anchor with it, but they might never test their gear to its full potential. Whereas with aid climbing, it has to work.
Yeah, no, that you're obviously totally right on that. And I haven't gone through the journey of being just a trad climber or a sport climber and then transitioning,
Yeah,
into aid to know how that feels. But um, it would be it would be spooky to, especially with trad climbing, not so much if with bolted climbing, obviously, but to suddenly be um, having your weight on this gear and yeah, what is it going to work? That crack's not completely parallel.
yeah,
Um, you know, it could this thing pop out? Um, but thankfully, the way my climbing developed, I didn't really go through that
yeah,
phase, so I
yeah.
can only imagine what it would be like.
Yeah. I guess you started getting more into aid climbing at I guess at the height of where quite a lot of notable ascents were being made around, I guess, the world, but I guess especially the valley, Yosemite Valley.
Well, Yosemite is certainly the hub of aid climbing and big wall climbing within the states,
Yeah.
and um, multiple cliffs there, including others such as Half Dome and many more that were the focal point of development of more and more difficult A climbing. And so the use of copperheads um, and smaller pitons started to take climbers places that they hadn't been before and make routes that were previously, not even considered start to become possible.
Yeah. So,
And
sorry, just to explain to the listeners at home that a copperhead is a small piece of copper, usually in the shape of, I guess, a small cylindrical type shape, which is kind of where you find somewhere on a piece of rock where you can't quite place either a piton or a nut or a cam, but that there's a slight opening and you can just hammer this piece of copper in that molds to the imperfection in the rock, which you can then hopefully hang more than your body weight on.
well, that's a very good description. Um, the copperhead, the shape of it, actually, almost everybody has seen them not as climbing gear, but in use for just cabling two wire ropes together. So, the my garage door opener, had this cabling system for opening it, and those cables are all connected to each other through these copper sleeves that just crimp down in them. And so the copperhead was just adapted from a technology that wasn't intended to ever be it, um, in which you crimp down one of these cylindrical copper sleeves at the end of a wire, and then the other end you use a second one to create a carabiner loop. And so you can hold on to the loop and put the other end of it, which has this cylindrical piece of copper, into a little pocket, generally in a dihedral, in a 90-degree corner that doesn't have a deep enough crack to hammer a piton in. And then you take the pick of your hammer and smash this thing into the pocket. And for larger diameters, things larger than an eighth of an inch cable, they can hold a lot of body weight. They can be, well, I should say a lot of weight, scratch the word body.
Yeah,
They can hold falls if they're larger. But some of those smaller ones are pretty much just only body weight. And the question always is, did the copper really adhere enough to the pocket to
yeah,
keep it in place?
yeah,
So copper heading allowed climbing up small little dihedrals that didn't have a really viable crack in it. Um, and sometimes it's really reliable and easy to do it, and other times it's very sketchy.
yeah. Okay. I've never used a copperhead. I've seen them. It looks scary to use, especially someone who hasn't used them. Um, yeah,
Well, the problem with copper heading is that it's hard to assess whether it's really good or not. Sometimes you have a nice deep pocket, and when you smash it in, it's like, yeah, this is never coming out of there.
yeah,
And sometimes it's even difficult to remove them when the second person in your party comes up to go pull your gear out. Sometimes you can't even retrieve them because they're in that well.
yeah,
But then there's other times in which it's like, I think it's okay. And you go to whack it one more time with the pick of your hammer, and then that just unsettles the whole thing and it pops straight out.
yeah,
It is like, oh, wow, that was like barely there.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I'm guessing by hitting the copper, you're creating heat, and if you keep hitting it, you create more heat, which then becomes more malleable. It's a
Yes, well, yeah, that's how it works. They do definitely get warm when you start, hitting them. And but if if the pocket it's in isn't well formed, or the dihedral you're putting it in isn't fully 90 degrees, sometimes when you hit it at the top, it'll cause the bottom to pop loose and vice versa. So
yeah, okay,
trying to tap it in there to where you're not loosening it as you're putting it in. But it's fascinating how the copper will almost just bond to the rock. I don't understand the physics of it, and maybe that's just an illusion and it's not really happening at all. But
Yeah.
it seems as if the copper will just stick itself to the rock.
Yeah. I'm not a physicist, but I guess my guess is that it finds tiny little imperfections in the rock and it creates friction. I guess because it's shaped to the rock. So as long as it's being pulled in the direction of most friction, I guess it will hold. That's an educated guess. That's not based on actual knowledge.
Well, I have no superior knowledge to you at this.
Well, you've
All
got a
I
lot of
know is
experience, Mark.
all I know is you put the copper there and you smash it with your pick and it
No.
sticks.
Good. That's all you need to know. So after your escapades with in the quarry and partnering up with Richard, you Richard kind of allured you into going over to El Cap and
Yes.
climbing something that was unclimbed on El Cap.
Well, that's correct. I think lurid is probably the correct description. When he first proposed the idea, my reaction was no. It's like it was just far too big of a project,
Yeah.
too far beyond anything that I had done before. Um, but Richard was persistent, and I participated, and the rest is history uh, for that climb. And that was my first major big wall accomplishment. I had done a lot of shorter eight climbs, but I had not climbed anything that was what we call a grade six climb,
Yeah.
meaning 3 or more days on the wall. And so to start with that um, was yeah, pretty bold, I think,
Yeah.
but it came together, and so yeah, I owe a lot of gratitude to Richard for mentoring me and bringing me into that.
Yeah. Okay. So what route was that on El Cap?
Well, so after we completed it, we named it Wings of Steel,
Okay.
and it's on the southwest face of El Capitan. And it was the largest unclimbed expanse of El Capitan, at least as measured along the base of the cliff. There was 600 feet of wall there that had no climb going up it.
Okay.
And Wings of Steel more or less goes up the middle of that 600-foot expanse of cliff.
Okay. So why had no one climbed it before?
Well, that area has been called by some the Great Slab, and it's just the smoothest feature on El Capitan.
Yeah.
And so it's, as I said, 600 feet wide at the base. It's somewhat triangular shape, narrowing up as it goes to the top, but it's 1,200 feet to the top of the slab.
Yeah.
And we primarily climbed it not by using copperheads, although we had some of those, but there weren't very many features even for copperheading. So we did it by using very small hooks on very small flakes.
Okay.
And it was a very slow process
Yeah.
trying to work ourselves up just flake by flake up the wall.
Okay. So how did that feel? Because so for people listening at home, I guess hooks, you've got lots of different types of hooks. But my guess is you're talking about things like sky hooks and talon hooks, where it's a curved piece of metal, curved almost like the grappling hook that you see in movies, but just one edge that is very small, and you're looking for tiny imperfections or hopefully bigger imperfections to place your hook on and use your aider, your ladder, to kind of gain height that way.
Yes. So if it's too bad if we couldn't just break out of a podcast for just a second to show a picture of one of these.
Yeah,
But if you were to take your index finger and bend it over at almost 180 degrees so that it's pointing toward the base of your thumb,
yeah,
That's the approximate shape of the Chenard cliffhanger, which was kind of the standard, most common one in use in Yosemite back in the day, and probably still well, it's been replaced today by another thing called the talon, but it's the similar idea. The Chenard cliffhanger then has maybe at most, well, it has probably an inch, maybe an inch and a quarter, I'm guessing, of separation between where the tip is pointing downward versus the base of it on the other side. So you can put it over something that's, an inch and a quarter, maybe it's an inch and a half um, ledge that could go over. But and there's a number of other hooks that have been developed and come out since then, including this one I mentioned called the Talon, which is has three different. It's in a triangular shape, so it's three different hooks all in one. But there was a company, Leaper, that made two different smaller cliffhangers, we'll call them. One was the called the Broad, which had a flat tip that was perhaps a half an inch or so across for the contact point, and the other was the Leaper Narrow. And the Leaper Narrow just came right down to a very fine point. And the amount of throw that the Leaper Narrow has, that is from where the flat part of it touches the wall to how deep in the hook will go, um, can't be half an inch, I don't think. It's at most it's that much,
Yeah.
and it comes to just to a point that's kind of like a blunt pencil tip. It really comes down to a sharp little point as the width of it from the crook at the top where it starts to head down. It then immediately is in a triangular shape to where it narrows down to this point. And we found that the Great Slab on El Capitan had quite a selection of just little flakes. Some of them could be as thin as a nickel, and this Leaper Narrow hook had the ability to put itself on it and support body weight. And most of the things that we hooked on this climb were probably in the vicinity of the thickness of two nickels. Three would be generous. And we've tried using the Leaper Narrow on flakes like this in other locations, and Yosemite seems to be the only place that they're reliably can hold on to rock that small, because if you try them at most cliffs, the rock just can't support that much force and that close to the edge of the rock surface, and the flake will break.
Yeah.
But this part of the reason I think that we could climb the Great Slab using these hooks on flakes that were between 1 and 2 nickels thick is because the rock is just of superior quality there.
Okay.
And I think that's the reason the Great Slab is the Great Slab and doesn't have all these other features, because of the quality of the rock. It hasn't started, to fracture into cracks and seams and blocks and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. So when you were climbing Wings of Steel, um, I guess if you're going to climb a route and using a lot of hooks, you're not going to find a lot of protection, right? So, did you place any pitons? Did you place like any nuts? And how often did you place them? And what were the potential, if not the falls, like when you did fall? Because if you're going to do hook placement after hook placement after hook placement, that means there's nothing's protecting you if you do fall.
Well, the in answer to your first question, there are some cracks up there, but none of them last for that long. So we would angle ourselves over to a crack system, and we could use that for maybe 30 feet or 40 feet, or probably 50 might have been about the longest that any of them lasted for. So the majority, probably three-quarters or more of our upward progress was made without having access to a crack to help us along.
Okay.
Um, and so, since, yeah, there could be more than 100 feet gaps between where cracks were, that would be really, I think, well, I don't think, I don't think I'd be alive if we had just gone that far without any protection because we did take falls. And, if you fall far enough and you start into a tumble, that's pretty, uh, you can't be having that happening. This is also before the days of climbing helmets. People climbing today, like, well, you had your helmet on for sure. Well, no, the answer is we didn't. The lightweight helmets that we have today didn't exist back then.
Yeah, okay.
Um, so once you got to the place that you felt like that the exposure to falling had reached the limit, I should back up. Occasionally, you couldn't find a flake to use. Most of the time you could, but sometimes you get up into your aiders, these ladders, and you really have to feel with your hand because since it's above you, it was hard often to see where these little flakes were. And so you put your palms out, spread your fingers and just start rubbing the wall above you with everything within reach and trying to go, oh, whoa, here's what right here. Oh, yeah. But sometimes you would find just nothing. And when that happens, then the only way for the climb to continue is to drill a hole in the wall and put in either a bolt or a rivet. So now we have to define a new term here, which is the term rivet.
Yeah. So what's the rivet?
And and so in big wall climbing, where there's spans that you have to cross that have no crack, it's a common practice to drill a ladder of which is just a series every, 4 feet or so as far as you can reach from the last one, to drill a shallow hole and put in a chunk of metal in there that's will hold body weight. So this is a 1/4 inch in diameter hole. And there's different schemes that have been used. A lot of climbers have used what they just call a dowel. They just buy a chunk of aluminum, chop it up into inch-long segments, then you can drill about a 1/2 inch deep hole and then just pound the dowel in there. And then you have this little stub of metal hanging out of the wall. And you can take a thin 1/2 inch in diameter sling and clove hitch onto the end of it and tie off and connect. The rivets we used um, actually have a button head to them. And so they were 5/8 of an inch long, I believe. And it's a tube of aluminum. Well, actually, ours were stainless steel. So it's a stainless steel tube that's been split so that it can flare out. And then it has a button head at the end and a nail that can be driven down the center of it. And the button head has a divot to accept the head of the nail.
Yeah.
So you slide it in. You then put a 1/8 inch in diameter cable in a loop uh, um, between the rock and the head of it, so that when you hammer it in, it'll put a little bit of pressure and hold that cable loop in place. And then you drive the nail down the shank of the rivet. It causes the rivet inside the rock to expand a little bit, causing it to grip. And then there's the button head that's securing the wire loop.
Yeah.
And the wire loop is somewhere around 3 inches in total length or so. And then you just clip your carabiner into it below the rivet and you can attach yourself to the wall.
Yeah.
Now, how much these rivets hold varies, but probably certainly 500 pounds. You might get 1,000 out of them.
Okay.
Um, but so we would occasionally have to use these to make upward progress if we could find no flake. But once you got far enough out from the last piece of protection, instead of putting in a rivet, we would put in an actual bolt. And the first pitch of the climb, my introduction to it is I took a 50-foot fall when I had a hook fail.
Yeah.
And what stopped me was a bolt that was, about 20 some feet below me. And I'm thankful that that wasn't a rivet because if it is, if we'd only had in rivets, I would have hit the ground,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
And that would have been the end of that.
Yeah.
Um, so we think that probably about the longest falls we were facing in the climb would be 80 feet.
Okay. And
But thankfully, that the 50-foot fall proved to be the longest one of the climb.
okay. Okay. And you came away falling 50 foot on a slab unscathed.
Yes, thankfully. The way that pitch unfolded was that Richard had gone up. Richard took the first lead, and he worked himself up to a spot where he came to a decently sized ledge, like several inches in diameter, or not. Diameter is the wrong word, but thick.
Depth. Yeah.
Any Anyway, he worked up a little past that and he took a fairly short fall. It wasn't more than 10 feet, I don't think. And he hit that one little ledge on the way by. There weren't very many of them on the Great Slab, but he found one and he dislocated his ankle.
Oh,
And so that was a big setback, and it caused me, after we got back and rested a couple of days, he didn't feel like he could lead. So I took the lead over.
yeah.
And when I took the 50-foot fall, I went right past the ledge that he had dislocated his ankle on, but I was several feet to the side of it at the point that I went by. So that was very intimidating. Might have been the most dangerous moment of the whole climb, as it
Yeah.
turned out.
Okay. And then I guess what did you do? I guess how did that affect you? Did you just get straight back on it, or did you have to take some time to just gather your thoughts and mental strength again?
Yeah. Well, you're moving into probably the most important aspect of the whole climb and maybe climbing in general for me. Um, why would anybody go to do something like what we did? And for me, climbing has been the most formative tool to my character development.
Yeah.
And it's kind of it is hard to describe and explain it, the mentality that is behind it. And I don't know the experience of other people because I only know my own. But for me, there was this thought that life, where was I going? What was happening? Who was I? What did I have to bend and mold to pressures and events in my life? I felt this internal need, this drive, like we had to do this climb. We had to do it. We had to finish it.
Yeah.
It was who I was. If I decided that, oh, this climb was too hard and we were going to quit, I just would have felt like, well, that just kind of set the tone of my life.
Yeah.
And so I felt a complete immersion in this climb and the need, like it has to be finished. If some event happens to where it's out of my control and I can't do it, then I can't do it. That's understandable. But if I quit in this, I've just decided that my life is just one of mediocrity. When things are really hard, I just guess I give up and quit.
Yeah.
And I wasn't willing. I couldn't accept the thought of that. And so that notion that we had to keep pushing this and working it forward and make it happen was was just it was the dominant emotion of my life at that point.
Yeah.
And I was not happy at all to have to go take over finish the first lead. Um, and after that fall, after the fall happened, and it was the way it unfolded was really unfortunate because I was moving sideways from one hook onto the next, and it was the hook I was moving onto was seemed to be very good. And so I was transitioning my weight over, which means taking and shifting my hips, which had my weight above my right foot and my right ater, to shifting left to get my weight above my left foot on my left ater. And you have to stand straight up and down in the aters. Otherwise, they're going to move off to the side. And you don't want that on a hook. You don't want the hook rotating sideways to adapt to a new angle. So you're trying to have the weight straight down in both. And so I was in the absolute most awkward spot of getting my weight onto the hook to the left. I'm holding my hand on the carabiner that it's attached to when that hook came off. So when I fell, it caused me to swing back to the right. Well, that caused the aider on to the right hook to go at an angle, which caused it to fail. And so in the process, though, it caused me to get flipped actually upside down. And so, and back to the wall. It's like, I wish I could have a video of how it unfolded.
Yeah.
So I did the 50-foot fall watching the ground coming up because I was actually inverted.
Yeah.
Um, so once Richard finally caught the fall, which he did, he just lowered me to the ground, and yes, we just hiked out of there to regroup.
Yeah.
But we were back the next day.
Yeah.
And that's because the climb had to happen. And I just felt an internal need that my identity as a person was tied to whether or not I was a quitter or not a quitter.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't accept the fact that I was going to quit.
Yeah. So do you feel that that's kind of innate within you as a personality to be that kind of to be that driven, or do you feel there were other things that kind of pushed you to want to kind of keep going?
Well, it may be a combination of all of those things. I don't know how much of it is genetic. All of us have our own experiences. The experience of losing my mother and starting out in college and doing well, and then having the whole thing implode, may have increased or heightened my need to say, well, do I quit at everything? Because I dropped out and quit from college. And in retrospect, I'm on a little bit of a rabbit trail now. In retrospect, really, it was a mental health crisis that I was going through. And I don't think that back then that in society in general, we really understood mental health nearly as well. And there was nobody who helped me. There was no aid I had. And I really wasn't able emotionally to just keep doing school.
Yeah.
And so I just dropped out and I quit. And it's like, oh, is that who Mark Smith is? Things are hard and he just quit. Well, I didn't need a pep talk to continue in school. I really was emotionally, I wasn't there to go do it. And so I think that I'm naturally driven as a person. I think I'd already gone through an experience in which, from people on the outside, would say that was a failure. And so I think that that heightened my need for this climb to happen. I needed to know for myself that just because things are hard doesn't mean that I don't complete them or do them. And
Yeah.
that's really kind of what's framed my climbing, I think, my whole life is this notion of introspection of what are my limits, what can I do, what's safe and what's not safe. Certainly, we're not going to go out and the fact that I'm still alive shows that I've made some good choices about things to
Yeah.
do and not do. Um, but the belief that I can conquer, I can succeed. I'll get the job done. I'll figure out how to engineer something. I'll figure out how to pull resources together. But just quitting because it's unpleasant or inconvenient, that's not something that I do. And I think that Wings of Steel was the first step and the biggest step in that journey. And that other climbs that I've done have really been follow-ups to the notion of just personal exploration.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think it's I think when it comes to climbing, doesn't matter which discipline of climbing you do, one would very quickly meet one's own physical or mental limit. And it, I think like you say, that you can decide whether you try and I guess face your fears and face your own um, potential insecurity in those moments, because we all have those where we think, can I do it? Um, and it's only you yourself who, in those moments, can really help you push further. Um,
Well, I think, yes. I think that you articulated that really well. And I think each of us has a need to know that we are capable, that we're competent, and that we can succeed. And at least for me, climbing has been the primary vehicle to explore that. And big wall climbing that necessitates a climbing, uh, in particular. Um, what's disappointing to me is sometimes working with people, and I've spent a lot of time working with younger people. And there was one that this happened fairly recently that had an opportunity to go on an outdoor adventure. And he said, I don't think I would enjoy it. Well, the purpose of the adventure wasn't to have fun. Nobody ever claimed that.
yeah,
But I thought, wow, it's just sad that like we won't. It was something that would have been a great bonding experience with his friends, accomplishing a purpose.
yeah,
It was just wholesome in every way, and even had sponsors, funding it. And we're not going to do it because I don't think I would enjoy it. And yeah, I just fight against that. I do all sorts of things I don't enjoy because there's a greater purpose to it.
yeah. I think we or as a human race, we live for most of us, not all of us, but for most of us, we live a fairly comfortable lifestyle. And I think within hardship, and I'm not talking about distress, but I'm talking about in hardship, we can grow as a person and feel better about ourselves. And I think hardship also makes us appreciate what we do have. I guess if I look at some of my climbing, hardship means physical exhaustion. Hardship means kind of an element of fear. Hardship means maybe I'm cold or hungry or thirsty. And then when I come back to civilization or come back home, I appreciate everything that I do have. And I think that's another reason why I think adventure and climbing is is good for people. And I think like you say, that young person who uh, didn't see the bigger picture, I think they may have lost out on that something.
Well, they did lose out on something, and um, what you just described is that when you come back from one of these adventures, you've gained something. That means you are a different person.
Yeah.
You come back having profited from it. And I think that there are many experiences I've had in life that have been difficult that I really haven't wanted to do that I've followed through with, in which climbing became the basis of a mentality of, yeah, okay, well, we're just going to have to buckle up and do this.
Yeah.
We're not going to look for the easy way out of it. We're going to figure out a solution.
Yeah.
And so I'm very grateful to climbing for helping me to learn that as a mentality of life.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree. Yeah. So, going back to the big tumble you had on that first pitch, I guess what was your mindset like when you went back onto that first pitch and you knew you'd taken a tumble? Um, was there some form of anticipation there when you were edging past that bolt back to the place where you initially fell?
Oh, it was horrendous.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I repeated the sequence of hooks because I was out, I don't know, at least five at the point, maybe more than that, five or six out at the point that I got to the place that the previous fall had happened. And yeah, it was very intimidating. It was a battle, an emotional battle to actually, to go do that next move again.
Yeah.
And I found a different flake um, that was a smaller flake that was better. I think I got lured into the one that I used the first time seemed pretty big and nice, but it was yeah, it was too big of a stretch and not as nice as I thought.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did work past that, and that was getting pretty close to the anchor. That first pitch was about 140 feet long, so I was out a ways at that point from the ground. And I remember getting to the stance where there was a nice enough stance you could just stand there without being in those aider slings and putting in the first bolt, and just what a relief that was.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And then Mark, sorry, and then Richard Jamad or jumped up the rope to you, and was it then his lead?
well, it was supposed to be. However, Richard's ankle was still recovering. And so he informed me that the second lead would be mine as well. And
Okay.
and that the second one probably from a technical difficulty ended up being the hardest on the whole slab, which after it was really like, wow, this is going to be really hard. Well, it was still hard, but thankfully it didn't get any worse. And Richard was basically my mentor into climbing. And I think in some ways it was really fortunate that it unfolded like it did with having me, do the opening two leads because there wasn't any doubt in anyone's mind that, he was still the driving force behind the climb and the better climber of the two of us. But my doing those two pitches, I think, helped me to establish the fact that yes, I was competent too,
Yeah.
and I guess the mentor's ultimate hope is that their mentee becomes as good as they are,
Or better.
and or better. Well, I wouldn't claim to be better,
Yeah.
but anyway, I think that was a major step forward in my own recognition that I had come into my own space in climbing.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And then you climbed the second pitch. So I guess having watched I guess I came across your and Richard's name having watched the film with Alan McNeely,
Yes.
and he mentioned when obviously you guys being the first ascensionists, when he climbed it, he mentioned the whole climb had 125 hook placements.
Boy, I don't remember the number, but I'd be surprised if it was less than that.
Yeah.
It,
Okay.
it, it was a great number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds quite and I guess. some background on Ammon is that fortunately he's passed away since making that since having been the second person to climb your and Richard's route. Um, he said that that's probably at the time the route on El Cap that's got the most amount of hook placements. He said most routes have maybe 10 or 20 hook placements in the whole thing. That had 125, if not more.
Well, it made Wings of Steel a unique climb,
Yeah,
for sure. And it's probably all those hooks is the reason that it hasn't seen very much traffic. I
yeah,
think that's the one thing that's a little disappointing to me about the climb is that when you put a climb up, you hope other people will come behind you and benefit from what you did.
yeah,
And but with Wings of Steel, that hasn't proven to be the case. It's there, but it was, I think, was it 29 years from the first ascent until Ammon made the second ascent.
yeah. That's a long time. So why? I guess. So how many days did it take you and Richard to climb the route?
So all told, we spent 39 days on the climb. And um, getting up the slab itself took um, around 30 days or so. One of the problems there are many things that were delays to the climb, including there was a 3 day storm, which was, I think, it dropped a foot of snow on the summit of El Capitan, which is not supposed to happen in the month of June.
Okay,
It was, I think, the worst summer storm on record that anybody knew of. There was another 2 day storm. We were just trapped in our portal edges with our rain flies. But the other problem is that the summer that we did this was one of the deepest snowpacks recently in the Sierra Nevada, and there was water that was would run out of there was a ceiling, an overhang at the 1,200-foot elevation level of the climb, and water would run out of that thing at night all the way down to the base of the cliff. And when the sun would come out, it would then retreat back up for the rest of the afternoon. And so, depending upon where we were on the climb, and it did improve a little as the climb wore on, but it would be until typically 11 in the morning before we could do anything because water was running where we were trying to climb,
okay,
and that just makes it too difficult.
yeah,
Even though we're A climbing, you don't want the slickness in the rock. So I'm the type of person that wants to be getting up before the sun breaks,
yeah.
eating breakfast and being out there. And there was no point in that. It was, yeah. And Richard and I aren't exactly fast climbers anyway. I've joked and said, yeah, we hold the record for the world's slowest rock climb.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. But 30,
but we
so, so was that 39 days from the moment you set off from the ground, or 39 days including the attempts on the first pitch and then coming back to the ground?
No, that was 39 days in which we were self-contained.
Okay.
And
So did you have 39
so,
days worth of food and water with you?
well, we had 30 days of food and water with us. And fortunately, it was an unusually cool summer. We threw out water when we got to the summit. So we had plenty of that. And that's the one thing I guess you can't afford to run out of. We did run out of food. And it got fairly severe at the end. We started rationing pretty early on,
Yeah.
but I think it was the last 5 days, I had 500 calories a day of food.
Okay, wow.
So yeah, so we were eating one meal, and that meal was basically about a half a meal. So by the time that we actually pulled onto the summit, there was not an ounce of body fat on me anywhere.
Yeah, okay, wow. Okay. That's That's intense.
I saw a movie some years later about how the military had people do voluntary starvation during World War II because they knew that there were going to be troops and civilians that had been starved during the war, and they wanted to know how best to rehabilitate them once the war was over. And as they were describing the mentality that was in the persons that were in this experiment, I was shocking because it's like, whoa, that was me. Like what they were going through for craving food and the whole thought process behind I'm starving and what to do about it. I went through that myself.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. That's 39 days on the wall. That's incredible. And to have climbed it and to not have come down, that shows a real strength of character from yourself and from Richard. And I guess that wasn't the only, I guess the stress of the climbing and the food and the storm and the 39 days on the wall wasn't the only thing that you, both yourself and Richard had to deal with, right?
Um, well, that we could do an entire podcast just on what all happened, with Wings of Steel. We had a lot of pushback from the climbing community itself.
Yeah,
Um, and so we had the difficulty of the climb. We had our own fears to overcome. We had the running out of food, the falls that we took, and basically a lack of support from the climbing community in general.
yeah,
And so Yosemite, at that point, it's less so now, was a pretty cliquish place.
yeah, okay.
And it's like, who are these people that we don't know that are coming here to go climb, you know, the
Yeah,
biggest unclimbed, slab of rock in El Capitan.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so, yeah, there was a lot of pushback from that. And that's a story all of its own.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll put a link in the description so people can, if they want to know more about the story, they can view the documentary that was made, and I think it's available on YouTube somewhere.
Yeah, the documentary's out there. I believe it's free at this point, and it gives a really great description of Ammon McNeely that you said unfortunately passed away from a non-climbing accident
Yeah,
a few years back now. And the process he went through, and it gives you a little bit of an idea about the climb itself.
yeah, 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 yeah. And I guess what was it when you guys climbed Wings of Steel? It's graded. Is it A4 plus A5?
Well, at the time we graded it 510 plus. There was a short section of some pretty hard free climbing. Frankly, I thought it was probably 11 minus. But anyway, Richard led that section. He rated it
Okay.
10 plus. And we rated it A5. And certainly with the fall potential that was there, A5 was the only proper rating. When guidebooks have come out, they've rated it as less than that, and I think that was part of there was a lot of pushback we received after Wings of Steel. There were things written in magazine articles like Climbing a Rock and Ice magazine that were less than flattering.
Yeah,
There was a book on wall climbing that somebody wrote that said an example of how not to do a big wall is Wings of Steel.
yeah,
That was the print. And so I think it was like, yeah, no, this can't actually be A5,
yeah,
because and so it was rated less than that. And aid ratings have shifted to what is A5 today is different than then. But I think, we rated it 510 plus A5, and that was a proper rating for it.
yeah. At the time, with
And
the gear available at the time.
And we should say, for people not familiar with the aid system, so it's rated A0 to A5, and A0 would mean that there's a bolt. Typically, you're just clipping in and just pulling in the bolt, like you can't. the difficulty of the move is such you just choose to put a sling or a carabiner and a bolt and pull on it, or put aiders on it to make progress. And A5 is then, facing a long fall off of equipment that's tenuous.
Marginal.
Marginal would be a good word for it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Um, Sorry, lost my train of thought. We're talking about A5. So, so I guess it was unrepeated for 29 years until Ammon jumped on it. I'm not sure if it's had any repeats since then. I haven't really looked into that. Could it be that with all the negativity around the local community, who after you and Richard had done the first ascent, maybe they didn't fancy climbing your route just in case it was difficult deep down inside, and if they weren't able to climb it and maybe reaffirmed that you guys were actually the real deal, it would have been their ego that was affected after all the negativity that was projected onto you guys.
Well, it's entirely possible that that was a part of the thinking
Yeah,
process, because if they went up to do it and couldn't do it, that that wouldn't look good for the negativity that they had had.
yeah,
And the person that made the most, that I'm aware of, that made a credible second ascent attempt was um, Piton Pete, as he calls himself, in in the climbing forums in the United States, Pete Zabrock. And he went up in the first pitch, which he did complete, and he said, "That's it." He didn't, he wasn't, wasn't going to do more. And he was very polite, and to Richard and I, and told everybody what he found. But he wasn't a part of that historic climbing corps
yeah,
that had been dumping on us back in the day.
yeah, yeah.
And even that was, I think, 28 years after the first ascent.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
yeah, your theory is quite possibly the case. It's like just best to leave that alone.
Yeah. 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 It's
If
only a theory, right? It's only based on a theory. We will never know. We will never know. So after your ascent of Wings of Steel, I guess you had a bit of an appetite for I guess is what's considered quite hard aid climbing.
Well, there were some other, yeah, notable difficult wall climbs that Richard and I found and worked on. And I guess from my point of view, I think that the hard A climbing, we didn't do climbs for the sake of finding hard aid, but I think that we did climbs that we thought would be challenging or at our limit.
Yeah.
And what made them that was the fact of having this, hard aid in them.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did another major ascent in El Capitan some years later called Ring of Fire, that the first pitch of it off the ground may be the best. Well, it could be the best lead I've done a climbing. It's at least in competition for that title. The second pitch of Wings of Steel was is I guess one I'd be less likely to want to repeat. Um, but and Richard and I went out into the call them the mud towers, the Fisher Towers in Utah,
Okay.
out in the southwest of the United States, and climb what was supposed to be the world's hardest A climb. Somebody who was a known figure, put up a climb there and said this thing is rated A6, a new difficulty rating.
So what
And
does
Richard,
A6 mean? Because we've only just talked about up to A5.
well, what makes A6, according to those who believe such a rating exists, is that not only is the climbing so tenuous that you could take an extremely long fall in excess of 100 feet, but that in addition to that, that the anchors between the pitches of the climb aren't secure enough that you can have faith that the anchor itself could sustain the impact of a falling climber landing on it. So
Okay.
you could end up sending the whole team and all their gear tumbling to the ground. Now, to the best of my knowledge, this has never happened in a hard aid climb.
Okay. So
Um,
so why would someone want to climb something that might be potentially rated a 6, which would be a lot of marginal gear, and potentially a lot of hooks, with the potential to fall, with the potential to rip everything out and everyone die.
well, I think for me, when I read the article in Climbing Magazine that described this, and the author proposed shifting the rating grades downward to make more room upwards, of which he then even added a grade beyond that. When I read the whole thing, I thought, wow, by this person's reckoning, Wings of Steel would be barely A4.
Okay.
And I thought, so are you telling me, this was my own thinking process. I'm going, so you're telling me that there's somebody that's climbing grades above anything I could ever dream of. And really, what I've done that I thought was super hard is just like, kind of hard,
Yeah.
barely hard.
Yeah.
And that was troubling and disturbing to me. Um, was was it the case that really the things I thought about myself were those even true? So I guess it became a point of revisiting the very questions that Wings of Steel was born out of. And when I saw that article, I think I saw it first. This is one in which I had more of the lead than Richard. He was the only person I'd possibly consider going and doing this with. And you're not going to do that climb solo.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
least I
Yeah.
would.
Yeah.
Richard might. He's kind of crazy for solo climbing. Anyway, I contacted him and it's like, we need to go out there and we need to go see what it is. So the unknown of it and the thought that maybe my assessments of myself were inaccurate after all
Yeah.
was the driving force to want to go do it. And yeah, we were definitely scared when we went up there to go do it and didn't know what was going to be there.
So
And I
what was the
hope that
route
I
called?
say that again.
What was the route called?
Oh, it's called Intifada,
Intifada.
which is um I translates basically to holy war.
Okay.
So anyway, yeah, the name of the climb is Intifada and it's on Cottontail Tower in the Fisher Tower Group in Utah near Moab.
Yeah.
So
So that's kind of that's is that a slightly softer stone?
slightly softer. That gives it too much credit.
Okay.
The Fisher Towers is a pretty fascinating formation, and it is sandstone. And the quality of the rock varies significantly as you climb through certain bands. I will say this for Intifada, the most impressive pitch of all is one in which you're in one crack system, but the next crack system is about 40 feet over, but there is a band of embedded rocks that was, just laid down, I guess, in a stream bed at, a lake or something at one point. And these rocks are just all protruding out of the wall, and you have to go put little slings on them and just, work across the cobblestones embedded in the wall. And the wall's dead vertical. Anyway, um, so the rock quality through that is different, although it doesn't matter because you're just on these, these rocks, hoping that you. Fortunately, I that was my lead, the way the coin flip worked out. Fortunately, I didn't pull one of them out, but there were other spots higher up, especially that the rock is literally dissolving slowly with time.
Yeah.
And there are mud flows there that was once rock above, and the mud has flowed down into cracks. And there was one crack that was just choked off with this, mud that was halfway to being rock itself. So yeah, uh, it was amazing how poor the rock quality was
Yeah.
through most of it. Other parts were okay.
And quite scary to climb.
Well, it was. This is largely a pitonable climb, although there was sections of everything from copperheading to hooking. But there was one spot where I pounded in a piton, and you can kind of tell when you pound them in by the sound, the ring that they make. It was like, oh, this thing is so good. And um, I got up on it, and it just out of nowhere, it just popped out. It's like, well, that would never happen in granite.
Yeah.
So, um, and that Richard and I didn't have I have really experience. Well, we didn't have experience a climbing sandstone. I'd done free climbing on it, and seeing that happen, yeah, that was intimidating, and just told tells you a little bit about the fact that that rock isn't highly reliable.
Yeah. Okay. But I guess the mental side of climbing that rock is one, the rock isn't in sections isn't that secure. You've got the knowledge that the route has been graded at 8.6. Um, so I guess it's all these mind games playing as you're climbing and approaching this thing. So
Yes, the the mind games for that climb were they were very real. And there was this fear of trepidation of going, okay, well, so we got this pitch done, but the A6 is still, that's still up there.
yeah,
And um, in as you're working up the crack systems, um, you're trying to be as cautious as you can. You're trying to, um, when you put in an aid placement, above you, you can get beside the one you're on and get in your aiders and bounce a little bit and hope that if it's going to break, you can coax it out while you're still beside the thing next to it that would be able to hold your fall because you're not really falling yet.
yeah,
You're just having to make a sudden, quick transfer of weight from the failing piece to the one that exists without taking a fall. So climbing goes slower as we're doing that. And if we had a lot of experience in desert sandstone, it would have probably been a little easier mentally, on the mental game. But it's like, do we really understand how the rock is behaving and what we're doing? And this fear of, yeah, but the hard part is up there yet to come. And as we actually got to the spot that was, believed to be the A6, yeah, it was very frightening. And also we were constantly breaking off chunks of, rock and mud that, was either part of the original cliff or mud that had flowed down in there. And so there was one point at which Richard referred to the trail. There's a hiking trail that goes right under this climb. There's not very many people out there, but Richard said it's like you're cluster bombing the trail because you could these things chunks of mud would fall hundreds of feet and then they would hit the dirt by the trail and put a big puff up. But it was very much a mental game. And when we actually got to the top, it was a really big moment of triumph.
yeah. So did you ever, when you climbed this thing, did you ever have a get out clause? Did you kind of have a chat to each other and say, well, if it gets to that point, like, then I'm not comfortable with this. I might have to come down, or was it just an unspoken kind of persistence that nobody said anything and you just kept going?
So in answering that, I'm gonna back up to Wings of Steel. When we went to do that climb, we had an explicit agreement that neither of the two of us would suggest that we should quit.
Yeah.
And we thought this was a great idea because if neither of the two of us could suggest we could quit, we just couldn't. And neither of us did. And the thought, especially when we went through, we were 20, almost 25 days in, I think, when we had a 3 day storm. It was pretty ugly. And we didn't have any food. We're already, eating almost nothing. And so anyway, when that's pretty much stayed in place for all the climbs we've done since then. I think that although Richard and I never explicitly have stated it's like, no, um, we can quit. You just can't be the one to suggest it. So,
Okay,
so
brilliant.
yeah, I think we would have had that discussion if it wasn't for the history that we had between us. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think there was a feeling like there was no quitting.
yeah,
And something could happen in which you would just decide no. There was a climb that Richard had worked on at the Riverside Quarry, and it just, it got to a place where there was a block that had to be moved past, and it's like, I just don't think it's safe to do that.
yeah,
And he went back up a second time to go do it and got to that point as like just not doing it and just quit.
yeah.
And so anyway, there can come a point for that. But yeah, no, it was understood. Nobody was there was no talk of quitting allowed in this.
Okay, cool, cool, brilliant. So when you climbed Intifada and you got to the proposed A6 pitch, what did you find?
Well, the pitch, first of all, the anchor itself that appears to be at the place we believe to be A6. One of the problems is that there probably is now, but there's no topo that was published of this climb. And we talked to the local guidebook author who lived in Moab and who knew the first ascensionists, and he said there's yeah, he's never provided one. But when we got to the place that appeared to be it was Richard's lead that got up to that anchor, and he found quite a bit of little things here and there, which, he carefully triangulated and slung together and brought down the anchor points and put together an anchor that, in our opinion, should be able to hold a fall.
Yeah,
It's not as nice of an anchor as you like, but it seemed to be reasonable of what you could call an anchor.
yeah,
And the pitch that went above it was hard, but um, it didn't seem, we were surprised that it was a lot easier than we expected it to be. And there
yeah,
was a point, a third to halfway out that lead, that I got in a friend behind it's kind of a block on a ledge behind it, and it's like, I this is not going to come out of here. Like this is a fall stopper right here.
yeah,
So we never did find the A6 in the climb, and it was actually a little disappointing that it wasn't more of a climb than it was. It's a very interesting climb, worth doing,
yeah.
but is more like A5 minus, and Richard's opinion A4 plus,
Okay,
than that was not A6.
yeah,
So in some ways it was a little disappointing from that point of view. Although maybe I should be happy that we never had to actually confront something that we'd never seen before.
yeah. I guess finding an A6, right? I guess when Ammon did the second ascent of Wings of Steel, he was averaging 6 to 7 falls per pitch. And I guess if you're going to climb an A6, my guess is that you can't fall unless,
Right. Yeah, right. Well, you can't fall at all.
yeah,
So, if you did, you'd just be praying that
something would
that
hold.
it would all, yeah. But even with the climb with that I did with Richard on Intifada, we had what was definitely a nice anchor, the one below the anchor that was the A6 anchor, and we had a pair of ropes dynamic ropes connecting those two anchors together. Now,
Yeah.
we could have taken the longest fall in the history of climbing. That would have been impressive.
Yeah.
Um, but even then, we weren't destined to end up on the ground. Now, that wall is vertical to overhanging, and you could end up still hitting, maybe bouncing off stuff and getting, you wouldn't, that could have been, you could die in that fall.
Yeah.
But no, we even had the previous anchor strung together with that one just in case.
Yeah. 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 Okay. All thinking ahead, just in case.
Well, we did everything we can, and over all of my climbing, I've always tried to whatever I'm doing, do it as safely as possible.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And some,
I guess, and that's the misconception that people who don't climb have of climbers who think that as climbers we take unnecessary risk, but we try and do everything we can in our power and the knowledge we have to try and minimize that risk to something that we feel is manageable.
well, that's very much the case. I uh, have a relative through marriage that definitely thinks that climbing is completely crazy, and no sane person would go do that.
Yeah,
Um, and part of it is that, I think that person doesn't have any idea about all the things we do to try to make it safe. The other thing is, most everything we do in life is a risk versus reward calculation. And it's easier to assess the risk of something than it is the reward.
yeah,
Somebody sent me a link the other day about, another person skied off the summit of Mount Everest. Well, to me, that sounds a lot more risky than Intifada at an A6 anchor.
yeah,
Um, and it's a lot of people would be like, well, that's completely, I mean, no sane person should do that. And I think the problem is that while we can assess the risk of it, we have no idea what the mental state was, what the reward was. What was the reward for people who have done that? Only they know. And if you can't know that, you can't know whether it was a bad decision or not.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
So
very
I think
personal.
having, yes. And so I think having charity to people and saying they made their decision to do their event. And I assume that they knowing more about themselves than I do, made the best decision for them.
Yeah,
But without knowing the reward side of the equation, you can't analyze the equation.
yeah, yeah. So, I'm guessing with all the aid climbing that you've done, and
Yeah.
those moments when fear really kicks in, how do you personally deal with that fear?
A climbing fear is a little different than other fears I've had climbing and mountaineering in that you have more time to think about it as it's happening. Um, a while back, I was involved alpine climbing in a lightning storm. That was I mean, as lightning was around us. That was so scary. But you're just moving, you're doing stuff. And climbing unroped is that's a little bit different. Um, but still, you're in the process of moving and doing things. Is unroped solo as you shouldn't be thinking about what you're doing as far as thinking about the consequences of the environment. You're just looking at the next move and focused on
Yeah,
it. With aid climbing, though, with hard aid climbing, you get in situations in which you're not in immediate danger. Sometimes you are on a piece of gear. It's like, I don't know if this is going to last too long. I better keep moving. But in general, you can stop and you can think about what's happening. And I think that the ability to, for fear to come up in you is a little bit of a different animal. Um, and when that happens, though, it's essential that you just stay focused on the next move. What's the next piece? And you may look down and think about, if I fall from here, this is likely what's going to happen, but you then have to redirect and stay focused on the mission about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And
So,
it
so you're using instructional self-talk to focus yourself in the moment away from the brain that sometimes wants to move to at times to fear.
well, yes, instructional self-talk is there are times in which that's important. Eventually, hopefully, most of the time you get to the place that it just kind of becomes innate that you no longer have to tell yourself, okay, breathe slowly, this is, look for the next move. Okay, Mark, you'll be okay. I really, that may have been more of my experience, as a younger climber,
Yeah,
but I think with climbing hard aid, you start to just get in the zone
yeah,
and you just start looking at the next move. Should that be a small piton there? Maybe that should be a copperhead. Well, is there a hook move around? Well, and so you go in the problem solving mode
yeah,
and you have to the fear of what could happen if a fall happened is one that you learn to shut that out and not give it attention.
yeah, because it's unhelpful.
Well, yeah, it is unhelpful. So there's no benefit to that. I haven't done much uh, unrope climbing. I've done some. Um, And there was once I was on, it was an easy climb, and I didn't, I was climbing on rope, and I was like, oh, I feel scared. Like, well, what? It's like I just realized, wow, this is unacceptable. Like, you've got to rein this in right now because you can't even be thinking that.
Yeah,
Um, and with a climbing, you really have to be into that mentality because you be hours. A hard eight lead can easily take half a day, just to
yeah,
advance one rope length, and it can take a whole day. And so you can't be jumping back and forth like, oh, I'm feeling scared. Okay, well, and talk to yourself, get it under control. You really have to be able to you just get in the zone and just keep doing what you're doing.
yeah,
And so I think that's an attribute that I think does translate to other things in life. And um, the ability to just say, I'm in the zone and I'm doing something and just keep doing what you're doing.
yeah,
I think climbing aids in your ability to learn that skill.
yeah. And I think people sometimes have a misconception. I think I might have mentioned it earlier that aid climbing is easy. And from my experience, my limited experience of aid climbing, that it's physically and emotionally really, really tiring.
That's been my experience too.
Yeah.
It's
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
you you do bring up an interesting point that I really hadn't given consideration to, and that is if you were on, I've done leads that have lasted at least 10 hours in length, and on difficult first ascent stuff, and that is the case that trying to emotionally stay with it for that length of time
Yeah,
is, that's a challenge all of its own, and I think the result of experiences doing that have been beneficial to me after I've come home and, then I eventually went back to college. And, he's like, wow, it's all day long. It's the weekend and I don't have any structured classes. And here's all the things I need to do. Can you stay focused, for a 10 hour study day?
yeah,
And probably climbing proved to be beneficial to me for all sorts of tasks that I really didn't understand at the time
yeah,
the benefit that came from it.
yeah, yeah. So, what has been the most I guess emotionally rewarding climb for you in all these years of climbing? What's the one that stands out the most?
Hmm. It, it might be the Intifada climb. Wings of Steel, at the point that we gained the summit of it, I just felt more browbeaten than anything. And there was no accolades from anybody. It was like, we were bad people. We shouldn't have been there. This climb was no good. You guys pack up your stuff and leave. So the fact, and plus we were emaciated. So we were physically just, wiped out. We were not appreciated. It was the opposite of that. I think that now looking back, I realize that climb's done more for character change and development in my life than anything, and it's the most important thing I've done.
Yeah.
But the Intifada climb was just really, that was satisfying to just say, hey, we just went into an environment that we had never been in, which is hard eight on sandstone. And we were able to learn it, to figure it out, to succeed with it, to do well, and to, come home safe and healthy. And that was a really satisfying feeling.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Amazing. Have you got any plans of doing more? Do you still aid climb?
Um, the last eight climb I did was in the year 2020,
Okay.
so that's a little ways back at
Yeah.
this point. During COVID, um, my daughter, who was turning 20, lost her job because her place of employment was closed. And she said, well, Dad, maybe we should climb a big wall. So we went to Yosemite and climbed a grade 5, which is a 2-day big wall, which took us closer to 3 by the time we were done with it.
Yeah.
And that was her one eight climbing experience. So that was a lot of fun. I think that I do have an ambition to go back and do another climb, that would be a big wall. But I'm up in my 60s at this point, so the clock's ticking. It probably have to
Age is
be,
not a limiting factor, Mark.
well, I agree with that. My employment job and my family obligations, those are some limiting
Yeah,
things.
of
But
course.
eventually retirement will happen, and I would like to do that. And even my friend Richard and I have talked about a project in Utah. So
Okay.
maybe we could go back and do that. But I have really transitioned more into alpine climbing. I've climbed all the major Cascade volcanoes out here on the west coast of the United States.
Yeah.
Um,
So you're
and so
hoping to
I,
find some more sandstone crumbly stuff.
well, it was the funniest article I read. Somebody took a friend of his up to climb this big sandstone thing, and it was like they get to the top and said, his friend said, "What more can you want than this?" And the guy said, "Granite."
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So I don't know that I don't have a particular need to go back to sandstone, although there is one climb there that potentially might draw us in.
it's
But
good
it's
to know.
I plan to keep climbing as long as I can.
Of course,
It's just that, yeah, it's just that, the targets change as circumstances of life do.
of course, yeah, yeah, great. A few more questions, and then I'll let you go, Mark. What is the mental side in your climbing that you feel that you need to work on?
Ooh, that's a pretty deep question. Um, and my hesitation to come up with an answer is evidence that I was not pre-fed a list of of things you might
Okay, yeah,
ask.
yeah. I
Um,
figured I like to keep it more free flow, so
yeah,
it is
well,
more.
no, that's not a criticism. Um, the I think that I've the things that I have to learn about myself and points of character to develop, that the climbing that I've done, I feel quite good about what those things are. Um, I think that probably moving into the future, a question that's going to start coming up is the fact that I'm aging limiting where I can go and what I can do?
Yeah.
And, I've ran into a really accomplished climber here within the last month who's in his 80s, early 80s, and he said he's quit climbing. And it made my heart sad. And I thought it may be the next frontier for me is to do things with climbing to establish the fact that I'm going to be strong as many years as I have life to go. And so, what type of climbing experiences it'll be, um, following that journey to maintain currency with purpose of life. I don't know. I don't know what that will be,
Yeah.
but I plan to be a climber as long as I'm able to get out my front door and go do something.
Yeah. Because it's your whole identity, right? And I can empathize with that. Well, not your whole identity. That's quite a big part of who you are and
Yes, well,
what has
but
given it.
I understood what you said for what it meant. There was no moment there which I thought, oh wait, it's not my whole identity.
Yeah.
But but um, climbing has been the formative tool that's helped form who I am.
Yeah.
And I think of myself as I am a climber.
Yeah.
And when I think of myself as I am a climber, I don't mean that I go to the indoor gym. Now, I do that for the last 28 years, twice a week. During the off season, I go to the indoor gym and I climb there, and I obviously find value in that, or I wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
But that's to call that climbing is like calling sawdust wood.
Okay.
It's Sawdust has a lot of value and importance, by the way. Um, but anyway, it's climbing. Climbing is to say I'm a climber is to say that I'm somebody that has control of my life, that I know who I am, that I'm purpose driven, that if something needs to be done, that I can do it, and that I won't shy away from things because it is hard.
Yeah.
And I hope to maintain those qualities going forward. And there'll be climbing projects that'll uh, appear in the future, I imagine, that'll be important for me to help establish that that's the case. So when 10 years from now you hear that I did another climb in El Capitan, which I'm not planning to at the moment, but if should such a thing happen,
Yeah.
you can just have a smile and go, oh yeah, Mark is still on his journey.
Yeah. Yeah. He's still doing it. We are all still
It's
on
it
a journey.
Yeah, it's not a destination. Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. It sounds very cheesy, but I completely agree. Yeah. So if you were to knowing what you know now, and you could transport yourself back into the young Mark, and you were to give young Mark some mental advice in climbing, what advice would you give him?
Well, I wish I could go back and do that. And I would have told myself, Mark, believe in yourself. Uh, People around you may think that it's uh, not a good idea. Your family may tell you it's not a good idea. Um, but if you believe in your heart it's a good idea, and you have evidence that some course of action will bring benefit, you should pursue that and don't be dissuaded by naysayers.
Yeah.
That would probably be the second thing. The other thing is I would say continue to dream dreams. There's a climb that I'd rather not mention that I so much wish I had done, and the thought occurred to me, and like this and that back in the 80s. If I had to do over, I would have taped a picture of that mountain to my bathroom mirror. I would have looked at that thing every day. I just wish that I just had the vision to just go do it. So Dream dreams and go pursue them. I wish I had somebody whispering that in my ear.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Thank you for your time and really appreciate the honest and open chat. Let me
Well, I have too, and I appreciated the questions and I appreciated the open format.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Mark. I hope you enjoyed this chat with Mark. He's very humble, and I would say that he's had some incredible aid climbing ascents and completely undervalued as a climber. If you have any suggestions of topics you'd like us to talk about, feel free to email us or send us a message, and we'll see you next time.